Good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present tonight. The following presentation includes the NJSLA, the Access, and the DLM state assessment results for the spring of 2024 for the elementary, middle, and high school. Although we have already presented the results for the high school's fall 2023 block, we have included some of that information for comparison. This presentation will include a large amount of data. After identifying what data is represented in each slide, we will spend some time at the end identifying some successes, areas of growth, and interventions. We will also indicate our next steps. Education isn't about getting kids to pass a test. The real goal is to build a love of learning. While we can all agree that results of standardized tests are not the full picture of a student's education, it is important to review results to assess strengths and areas for improvement. In addition, it is useful to notice trends in scores to see if our programs are moving student achievement in the right direction. Data from state testing is used as one measure within the context of multiple measures. The following slides will capture student performance on the NJSLA, the Access, and the DLM. Students took the NJSLA in English Language Arts in grades 3 through 9. Students took the NJSLA in Mathematics in grades 3 through 8, and in the courses Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry in high school. Multilingual learners in grades K to 12 took the Access test. Special education students in grades K to 12 with an intellectual disability took the DLM in Math, ELA, and Science. Please keep in mind that data needs to be interpreted carefully. Variables to consider are that this is the third administration of the NJSLA since not administering the test during the COVID years of 2020 and 2021. Similarly, there are no longer district factor groups or peer schools to be used for comparison. The NJSLA is a snapshot that provides information about students at one particular time. We are committed to using multiple measures to assess student progress, skill, and standard attainment. As we begin to unpack this data, we will look closely at the level of all students to see what types of changes need to be made to our curriculum, instructional practices, or tiered system of supports. To review, this slide demonstrates the 5 performance levels the NJSLA uses to delineate knowledge, skills, and practices that students demonstrate. Starting with the far left, Level 1 in red means that a student did not yet meet expectations. Level 2, which is in orange, is partially met expectations. Level 3 means that a student approached expectations. Level 4 means that a student met expectations. And Level 5 represents that students have exceeded expectations. In order to determine the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations, we add the Level 4 and Level 5 results together for a total percentage of students meeting or exceeding. At the high school level, Level 4 and 5, meeting and exceeding expectations, is considered college and career ready. A CCR determination means that participating colleges and universities have that the student can enter freshman year without having to take remedial classes. Let's begin with the 23-24 summary results. In Section 1, we are reporting a district analysis. Section 2, we will filter the data down to a demographic analysis. Following that, we will report Access test results, which were first reported in August. Then we will move to Section 4, which looks at the dynamic learning map results. Finally, we will end with Section 5, which will include our reflections and next steps. District analysis. We will begin with the area of English Language Arts. This chart shows the ELA spring results of our students in grades 3 through 9. As a district looking across, we see that in 3rd grade, our students had 26.1 who met level 4 and 1.1% of our students meeting level 5. This would be a combined percentage of 27.2% who met and exceeded expectations. This is a representative of all 3 elementary school students combined. As a district, we would compare this 27.2% who met and exceeded to the combined state total of 43.6%. This would be the same way we would interpret the data for the remaining grades up through grade 9. This chart outlines that achievement in a visual form. Again, dark green represents level 5 exceeding expectations, light green represents students meeting expectations, and those numbers are added together to determine the total number of students meeting or exceeding. Yellow represents students who are approaching expectations. This slide compares district performance to state performance. For example, if we look at grade 5, we see that 50.5% of 5th graders met or exceeded expectations in our district, while 52.2% of 5th graders met or exceeded expectations in the state. In this case, we performed 1.7% lower than the state. This slide represents the average score of students in each grade level. Continuing with 5th grade as our example, you can see that the average score of our 5th grade students was 746, which is 4 points lower than the state average of 750. You can continue this analysis into the previous grade levels as well. At the middle school, 41.4% of 8th graders met or exceeded expectations, which differs from the 52.9% of the average score of 8th graders who met or exceeded expectations in the state. Continuing with grade 8, the average score of students was 737 compared to the average score of 751 in the state. At the high school, the NJSLA was administered in the fall and in the spring. These scores need to be broken out separately because the sample size for both the district and the state differs in the fall and the spring, which is why we cannot just average the scores together. Please note, the fall NJSLA results were previously presented to the board earlier in the year, but we are including them here again to notice any changes or growth. For example, if we look at the spring administration, we see that the students who took the NJSLA in English 9 had 58.9% of those students meeting or exceeding expectations, which exceeded the state average of 58%. This shows important growth from the fall administration to the spring administration. Continuing with the spring administration, we see the average score of students was 751. The average score for the state was 755. We will now review how our students performed in the NJSLA mathematics. This chart displays the math results of our students in grades 3 through the course of algebra. As a district looking across, we can look at 5th grade and see that 32.8% of our students met level 4 and 5.4% of our students met level 5. This would be a combined percentage of 38.2% of students meeting or exceeding. This, again, is representative of all 3 elementary schools combined. As a district, we would compare this 38.2% to the state's average of 40.1%. This would be the same way we would interpret the data from the remaining grades from grade 3 up through the course of Algebra 2. If we look further down the chart, the middle school Algebra 1 results, which represent our Honors Algebra 1 students, had 100% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. This chart outlines district achievement levels by grade level or course in a visual form. This chart compares the district average to the state average. In grade 5, 38% of students met or exceeded expectations in mathematics. The state average was 40.2%, so there is a 2.2% difference. On this slide, we see the average score for 5th graders was 735 compared to the state average of 741. We can make that same comparison in each of the grade levels. At the middle school, we see that in Algebra 1, 100% of our 8th grade honors algebra students met or exceeded expectations compared to the state average of 39.5%. In grade 8, 19.5% of our students met or exceeded expectations compared to the 23.2% at the state. In middle school algebra, our students' average score was 788, which demonstrates that our honors 8th grade students outperformed the state average of 738. When looking at the other comparisons, you can see that our average is approaching that state average. Similar to the English 9 ELA, we have at the high school the NJSLA for algebra, which was administered in the fall and the spring. Looking at the fall administration, we see that 25.3% of students met or exceeded expectations in Algebra 1, which tied the state's fall average of 25.3. While the percentage in the spring is disappointing, the average for the high school overall saw a slight increase in students meeting or exceeding. This slide represents students' average scores in the fall and spring. In the fall, the average score tied the state average of 727. In the spring, the average score was 708 compared to the state at 738. We will now move on to the NJSLA Science. This chart displays the spring Science NJSLA results for our students who test in grades 5, 8, and 11. One important thing to note is that the science test is scored differently than the other areas of the NJSLA and is scored in 4 levels instead of 5. Students need to score a 3 or a 4 to be proficient and or advanced proficient. As a district looking across, we can use grade 5 as our example and see that 16% of our students met level 3 and 4% of our students met level 4. This is a combined percentage of 20% who met proficient and advanced levels of achievement. Grade 5 is representative of all 3 elementary schools. As a district, we would compare the 20% of students who met proficient and advanced proficient to the combined state total of 27%. This would be the same way we would interpret the data for the remaining grades up through grade 11. Also of note is that as a district, the percentage of students who scored 1 or 2 reduced by 3.9%, while the percentage of students who scored a 3 or a 4 increased by 3.9%. Since science has become a focus area, these gains represent steps in the right direction. This chart is just a graphic representation of the data presented on the previous slide. This slide represents the percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations on the NJSLA in science. If we look at 8th grade, we can see that 14.5% of 8th graders met or exceeded expectations compared to 18.8% of 8th graders in the state. This represents a 4.3% difference between how our 8th graders are performing compared to the state average. On this slide, we see the average scores of our students on the NJSLA for science. Continuing with 8th grade as our example, our students earned an average score of 161, while the state average was 164. This represents a 3-point difference. This slide compares the percentage of students who met or exceeded expectations between the 2023 school year and the 2024 school year. We can see that our scores across grades 5, 8, and 11 have improved. However, we have more work to do in this focus area. Now we'll move on to our demographic analysis. This chart displays the results of the spring ELA administration by race. It is broken down by elementary, middle school, high school, and all grade levels. It allows us to interpret if there are trends impacting a specific subgroup. Note, to protect student privacy, data on the number of students for cohorts with fewer than 10 students are excluded from this report. For example, in looking at the high school for the 2024 year, the Asian student subgroup has less than 10 students, so the number of students is represented by a dash. Out of the high school students tested, 3% were in the Asian subgroup, which is noted under the total percent tested 2024 column. To the left of that column is the total number of students tested, which was less than 10. If we look at all schools, we see that 48 Asian students tested throughout the district, with 72.9% of students meeting or exceeding expectations in English language arts. There were 119 Black students who took the test, and 27.7% of students met or exceeded expectations. There were 397 Hispanic students who tested, and 29.5% met or exceeded expectations. There were 109 students of multiple races tested, with 27.5% of those students meeting or exceeding expectations. And finally, there were 671 white students who tested, with 49.3% meeting or exceeding expectations. This chart is a visual representation of the spring ELA test by subgroup. It allows us to interpret if there are trends impacting a specific subgroup. This chart displays the results of the spring mathematics administration by race. It is broken down by elementary, middle school, high school, and all grades again. It allows us to interpret if there are trends impacting a specific subgroup. In all grades area, we had 64 Asian students take the math assessment, with 53.1% meeting or exceeding expectation. In addition, 168 Black students tested, with 13.1% meeting or exceeding expectations. Continuing on, there were 547 Hispanic students tested, with 15.4% meeting or exceeding expectations. There were 137 multiple race students who took the test, with 23.4% meeting or exceeding expectations. Finally, there were 885 white students who tested, with 28.6% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. This chart is a visual representation of the spring mathematics administration by race. Once again, it allows us to interpret if there are trends impacting a specific subgroup. This slide represents the spring NJSLA in science by race. Again, any group with less than 10 students is represented by a dash. For example, overall in all grades, we see that 179 Hispanic students tested, with 7.8% meeting or exceeding. There were 321 white students who tested, with 24.9% meeting or exceeding expectations, and there were 23 Asian students that tested, with 43.4% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. This chart represents the NJSLA science results by subgroup of race and compares how each subgroup performed in 2022, 2023, and 2024. On this slide, we see data related to gender in the English Language Arts Assessment. If we look at all grades, we see that 47.3% of females met or exceeded expectations, and 34.8% of males met or exceeded expectations. This slide reflects that same data in chart form. On this slide, we see data related to gender in mathematics. If we look at all grades, we see that 47.3% of females met or exceeded expectations, and 34.8% of males met or exceeded expectations. When looking at all grades, we see that 21.4% of females met or exceeded expectations, and 25.5% of males met or exceeded expectations. This is the same data in a graph form. The current slide represents the science scores by gender. There were 277 female students tested, with 13.7% meeting or exceeding expectations. There were 338 males tested, with 21.6% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. This is the same data in a graph form. This slide represents how students performed in the following subgroups: free and reduced lunch, students with 504 plans, English language learners, special education, general education, and all students. For example, if we look at the middle school, we see that 48 students with 504 plans took the assessment, with 47.9% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. This represents a 17% increase in the number of students with 504s who met or exceeded expectations on the 2022-23 NJSLA in English Language Arts. This is the same data in chart form. This slide shows mathematics data by the following subgroups: free and reduced lunch, students with 504 plans, English language learners, special education, general education, and all students. For example, if we continue with students with 504 plans and focus on the elementary schools, in grades 3 to 5, we see that 25 students tested, with 36% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. This is the same data in a graph form. This slide represents science data by subgroup. If we continue to look at all students with 504s across the district, 20% of students met or exceeded expectations in 2024, which is an increase from the 17.7% in 23-24 school year. This is a 2.3% increase. This slide represents the same demographic data in a graph form. Each year, our 11th grade students take the New Jersey Graduation Proficiency Assessment, NJGPA, in the spring. Students must sit for and take the assessment in order for additional graduation pathways to open to them in order to meet the graduation requirements. For example, if a student takes the NJGPA and does not meet or exceed expectations, the other pathways, such as PSAT, SAT, AccuPlacer, and the appeals process, are available to them because they took the NJGPA. If students take the NJGPA and meet or exceed expectations, they have met their graduation testing requirement. The results of the NJGPA were presented to the board on July 24th, 2024. We are including an excerpt of that presentation in the following slide. This slide compares the 21-22, the 22-23, and the 23-24 NJGPA results. As you can see, mathematics started with 37% as graduation ready, and then experienced an 11% growth rate to 48% graduation ready in 22-23, and increased another 1% in the 23-24 school year. In 21-22, in English Language Arts, 29% of students were considered graduation ready. In 22-23, English Language Arts experienced a 44% increase in the percentage of students who were graduation ready. In the 23-24 school year, 79% of the students tested as graduation ready, which was a 6% increase over the 22-23 school year. Overall, in both math and English Language Arts, the percentage of students testing as graduation ready has increased significantly. The 2023-2024 Access scores were reported to the Board of Education in August of 2024. Multilingual students in grades K to 12 take the Access test each year. Students are tested in 4 domains: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Students must earn a 4.5 or higher to exit the program. The Access test was administered in February and March of 2024. We tested 229 students, which is an increase from 98 students in the 22-23 school year. The data is reported in grade bands, K to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12. As previously mentioned, the Access scores were reported at the August Board of Education meeting. In grades K to 5, 139 students were tested. 1% were considered bridging, 10% expanding, 22% developing, 30% emerging, 36% entering. In grades 6 to 8, 45 students tested, 4% expanding, 36% developing, 22% emerging, and 38% entering. And in grades 9 to 12, 45 students were tested, 20% expanding, 38% developing, 13% emerging, and 29% entering. The next section will report the results of the Dynamic Learning Maps, which is referred to as the DLM. The Dynamic Learning Maps assessment is a test that measures the academic achievement of students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. This test measures what a student knows and can do at his or her academic grade level, regardless of cognitive ability. The assessment is individualized for each student based on their IEP and assesses them across a number of essential elements based on grade level and subject area to determine their mastery of the skills. Students are assessed in English and math for grades 3 to 8 and grade 11. Students in grades 5, 8, and 11 are also assessed in science. We had 26 students in the district take part in the DLM testing in 2023. The performance levels of the DLM are emerging, approaching target, at target, and advanced. This chart represents performance levels at each grade level for English Language Arts. When there are 0 students at a performance band, there is a 0 highlighted in that band's designated color. This chart represents performance levels at each grade level for mathematics. And this chart represents performance levels at each grade level in science. What follows are the district reflection on student performance and our next steps. Notable achievements. Grade 9 ELA showed an 8% increase in students meeting or exceeding expectations. Grade 6 ELA showed a 5.5% increase in students meeting or exceeding expectations. District-wide science assessment scores showed a 3.7% increase in students scoring proficient or advanced proficient. Middle school 504 students showed a 17% increase in students meeting or exceeding in ELA, from 30.9% to 47.9%. Middle school Algebra 1 showed a 21.4% increase in students meeting or exceeding expectations. For the NJGPA, 79% are meeting or exceeding expectations in ELA. And from 2022 to 2024, NJGPA scores increased by the following. In ELA, they went from 29% in 2022 to 79% in 2024. This year, the state average was 82%. In math, they increased from 37% in 2022 to 49% in 2024, and this year's state average is 55%. Achievements in programming and instruction were: we had a continued focus on foundational literacy skills, including foundations and just words. We provided training for teachers to support the integration of the workshop model for ELA in the middle school and high school. We have a focus on vocabulary instruction across content areas, including word walls and tiered vocabulary. We've continued to implement the tiered system of supports. We have focused on social emotional learning and positive behavior supports. There has been a focus on data to drive instruction. And we have continued to use district-wide assessment committees and building-based assessment committees to disaggregate data. We have had targeted professional development, including sheltered instruction, which helps teachers better teach our English language learners, Readers Writers Workshop, Foundations, DBQs, Open SciEd, and Link It, which helps teachers break down and use data. We do have areas of growth that we need to focus on based on our testing scores. Mathematics scores district-wide need to improve. All levels except middle school honors Algebra 1 and high school Algebra 1 saw a decrease in the number of students who scored meeting or exceeding. Even though Algebra 1 at the high school went up slightly, it is still behind the state average and needs to be a focus area. Science scores, while improving, are still an area in need of growth. Grade 5, we have 19.9% proficient or advanced, with the state average as 27.6. In grade 8, 14.5% are proficient or advanced, with the state average of 18.8%. In grade 11, 19.5% are proficient or advanced, with the state average as 28.1%. Elementary ELA also saw a decrease in the number of students meeting and exceeding. Moving forward, writing across the content areas needs to be an area of focus. And in terms of subgroups in both math and ELA, the subgroups of multilingual learners, who were previously referred to as ESL students or English language learners, and special ed students needs to be a focus area. Some strategies for intervention and improvement. District-wide, we need to focus on targeted small group instruction. We will continue to focus on intervention practices as outlined in the tiered system of supports. We will continue to provide school-level teams opportunities to analyze data, which can happen in assessment committees, department meetings, or grade-level meetings. We will assist teachers in the refinement of data conferences to analyze data to inform instruction and provide targeted small group instruction. Throughout the year, we will review our subgroup data. We will differentiate instruction based on such student data, and we will identify achievement gaps to make informed curriculum decisions. We will analyze evidence statements from our NJSLA reports, which target specific skills from each of the strands of that content area that will help us to better instruct on those specific skills. We will analyze our Link It benchmark data, conference with students, and set goals. And once again, we will continue to have a focus on reading and writing in all content areas. Some other next steps in terms of data analysis. We will use the data to evaluate our instructional tools, strategies, methods, and interventions that are implemented and decide if we need to make adjustments. We'll focus on small group targeted instruction, focus on vocabulary instruction, including Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary, focus on foundational reading and foundational writing. Foundational reading skills is a focus area across the state and from the State Department of Education this year. We will plan for enrichment and support for students. We will identify areas for professional development to help our teachers better address student needs. We'll continue drilling down data, continue to monitor the implementation of Link It and its use, increase vertical and horizontal articulation, and support college and career readiness at the high school. We do have resources for families who are looking for more information. And all of these links will be available when the presentation is presented. On our district's website, we can have resources as well as on the state's assessment FAQ page. And you can also find the 24-25 testing schedule for the entire year. The high school graduation testing requirements for the classes of 23 through 25 are linked. Information about the DLM is linked. Information about access for MLs, also called ELLs, is linked. And information from the Department of Education on assessment is also linked for families in this presentation. We would like to really thank you for your support and continuing to provide for our students in Manchester. Thank you.